How do I even begin to describe a game of this magnitude? Final Fantasy VII is a PlayStation 1 game released in 1997. It went down as one of the most famous video games of the 90s, a landmark for 3D games and JRPGs. Its story portrayed a crazy fantasy adventure of epic proportions, and fans said it was one of the most movie-like games ever made at that time. So, in 2017, I played Final Fantasy VII for the first time and reviewed it on my YouTube channel. I was very happy with this video. I thought it was my best editing work. It was the first video I would show to people. But in the video, I made it obvious I was not a fan of this game. I understood that it was subject to severe technological limitations, but I just didn't think it was fun. Partly because its story was butchered by bad translation and awkward cutscenes, even for the time. I mean, I looked at other contemporary PlayStation games and I just thought they could have done a lot better with 7. Yes, the concepts in 7's story are so cool, but it was like watching a well-written play with terrible actors and no budget. Every element of the story and gameplay was clunky, obnoxiously outdated, and poorly conveyed. I thought this game's characters and settings deserved better. They deserved to be used again in a version of the story that wasn't so boring, ugly, and incomprehensible. I'm sorry to say, this is one of those classic games that aged terribly and lost its glamour when compared in retrospect to similar games. But I can see why people who played it as a kid thought it was so cool, you know, before they'd played later RPGs and developed standards. And I always hoped that this game's remake would eventually deliver on the epic experience it was always meant to be. A remake of Final Fantasy VII has been in high demand for over 20 years, but Square Enix looked at the original product, looked at what high expectations fans had for such a remake, and realized that this project would be a long and expensive undertaking. If they were going to remake Final Fantasy VII, they were going to do it in grand and meticulous fashion, making sure that this insanely complicated story could be fully modernized. Square Enix revealed their remake project in a presentation at E3 2015. It was 5 more years before something was finally released, after extensively perfectionist development and multiple notorious delays. Near the end, Square revealed that this remake project was going to be so big that they had to release the game in multiple episodes. I think people were a little confused by this, not knowing what to expect, but still hyped to get their hands on it and re-experience the age-old tale of Cloud and Sephiroth. The first episode released in April 2020, titled Final Fantasy VII Remake, even though it contains only a short portion of the original story. Up from the beginning until the heroes have their climactic escape from the city of Midgar. Although this one arc was less than 2/5 of the original game's length, make no mistake, this game is not just Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 1. This is a serious standalone RPG, and the first major entry in a series of games based on what was originally just one. Square Enix is taking the original 7, cutting it into bits, and doing crazy things to each bit, extending them and turning them into standalone adventures that will each take dozens of hours to enjoy. This first episode's scope and importance are hard to express, but just to give you some perspective, 7 Remake requires 100 gigabytes to download. Its soundtrack includes over 150 original songs. The retail copy gives you 2 Blu-ray discs just to install it on a PS4, one for installation and one for play. The original Midgar story arc took me about 10 hours to pass through, but this time it took me 43. Square Enix has modernized Midgar, fleshed it out, and brought it so much life. To bring the story some necessary context, they've added new scenes, characters, bosses, and plot points that aren't like the original. They heavily modified and rewrote certain parts, and there are even a few events they removed from the original story. So make this clear in your mind. FF7 and FF7 Remake are completely different games that offer different experiences. You buy them for different reasons. They tell similar but different stories. That said, the remake story is a vast improvement. This is the epic story of a young super soldier named Cloud Strife, a boy who once idolized the soldier lifestyle but became disillusioned and quit his job to fight against the corrupt city-state for which he once worked. In the dystopian steampunk city of Midgar, Cloud has joined a band of eco-terrorists called Avalanche whose goal is to destroy the government of Midgar, which they believe to be destroying life on Earth by consuming too much of its resources, specifically a magical life essence called Mako. As Cloud and his cast of friends fight across Midgar, a dangerous rogue soldier named Sephiroth appears, an old and much more powerful comrade of Cloud's who was supposed to be dead. Sephiroth's intentions are unclear, but he uses sinister, godlike powers to wreak havoc, kill innocents, and lure Avalanche along on their journey, coaxing them to topple the regime of President Shinra as part of some greater unknown plan. Eventually, what was supposed to be a political movement by a group of mercenaries becomes a worldwide quest to defeat Sephiroth, this enigmatic, all-powerful figure who morphs in and out of existence and seems to plan a takeover of the whole world. Without a doubt, FF7's story is its selling point. Whichever version, you come to these games for the purpose of adventuring in a crazy, high-stakes steampunk fantasy world, and getting to know and love its diverse cast of characters. While I did get some of this value out of the old game, I just thought the cutscenes were so poor and the dialogue so badly translated that these characters could never be real to me. They had definitive personalities, but the way they expressed them was just off. Again, it was like a good play with bad actors. They mostly just gave me material to make fun of them with. But now, the characters are fully voice-acted, animated with flawless motion capture, and their dialogue is as good as it gets. I'm so happy to see these classic characters brought to life in a grippingly emotional way, now able to cuss and move and share so much more feeling. What's interesting for me to analyze about their personalities is how they're so close to how I remember them, even down to their small quirks, but I don't think those quirks are worth making fun of anymore because now they make sense to me. They're like real character traits. These are all things I picked up on in the original, but I just didn't understand because the writing was so bad. Like how Aerith is always making strange observations about her environment, and how Cloud always gets scared and childlike in the presence of Sephiroth, and how Sephiroth is always acting so smug while he says ridiculously cryptic things. They kept all these traits faithful to the visions of the original characters, but they wrote them so competently and believably that, dare I say, these things are actually charming. Every character is lovable, and it's a fun experience to get to know them through these amazingly immersive cutscenes. VII Remake is as cinematic an experience as I think the old version was meant to be. Both games blend cutscenes and gameplay seamlessly, constantly weaving in and out of story and playtime, and sometimes doing both simultaneously. This is definitely a movie-like experience, only so much longer and brimming with so much more content. Every inch of Remake is covered in laudable detail and purpose. I never thought I could get so immersed in the world of 7. I mean, it's very common that companies will market their next big product as a heavy-hitting cinematic experience, but it's rare that they deliver so hard. I can't believe Square actually delivered on their promises. 7 Remake is exactly the game it needed to be, and exactly what fans always wanted, which is absolutely crazy. The ultra-realistic world and the depth of character are complemented by genuinely fun gameplay. Just like its ancestor, 7 Remake's gameplay is battle-centric, but it sprinkles in tons of minigames and fun distractions, so there's lots of variety. The minigames are great for what they are, just random, silly, one-off moments, but I might argue that the new battle system is even deeper than the original. 7 used to have a mediocre, hybrid blend of turn-based combat and real-time strategy. The customization options they gave you were very innovative, but I always hated being rushed to select my next 3 moves. There was no time for planning. Inspired by the original, this remake keeps the real-time and team-based elements while ditching the turn-based style to make this into an action RPG like Xenoblade or Monster Hunter. Your party includes 3 teammates, and you can only control one at a time, but you also command the actions of the others. So, you're required to focus on direct combat as one fighter while also switching between characters and commanding them. The developers have balanced this process super well, providing for an interesting and complex challenge unique from most action RPGs. I can find one major complaint with 7 Remake, which is that its side quests are mediocre and most NPCs involved in the side quests are strange and ugly, kind of like Xenoblade X. Bad side quests from bad NPCs seems to be a cliché of the action RPG genre. I'm glad that Remake includes a lot of side quests as a decent distraction from the main storyline, but they should have been a lot better. This game is close to perfect, but because the side quests are so bad and I spent multiple hours doing them, I considered knocking 1 or 1/2 point from my out of 10 rating for this game, but after beating it, I immediately realized that Remake left me with such a big smile and so much to think about and so much new music to listen to that it's one of those things where the good parts make the bad ones forgettable. The good parts are just so strong that I don't think VII Remake is anything less than a quintessential must-play. My honest rating for Final Fantasy VII Remake is 10 out of 10. I consider it to be a quintessential example of action RPGs, PlayStation 4 games, story-driven adventures, and remakes. I was ecstatic with almost every change they made from this grandfather of an RPG to its fully realized 2020 version. The newly written story is rich in character, detail, and purpose. The new additions make total sense, and the parts they rewrote are mostly for the better. I still do not recommend playing 7 on PS1, because Remake is the definitive version of this story. This is the game it was always meant to be, and it's more enjoyable by a mile. The only rare moments where I thought the PS1 version did better were in the final mission, when they heavily rewrote several scenes that I actually used to like, and those scenes lost a little bit of their kick. After you play VII Remake, try watching some YouTube videos that list the differences between these games, because they are extensive and interesting. Anyway, playing this game has left me with a ton to think about, and I'm gonna be listening to its music for months, and you guys should support Square Enix for this project if you haven't already. I hope you get the same experience out of it as I did, and together, let's get hyped for FF7 Remake 2. Hello, P.S. I wrote this whole video before Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade came out, so you should play that version instead. It is the deluxe PS5 version. I played this on PS4. Do not play the PS4 version because the PS5 version, Intergrade, has additional story content. It has a new, apparently canon story chapter, and a few new cutscenes in addition to that. So again, that's Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade on PS5, the version that you should play because I think it is more canon than the other one. And yeah, that is Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade. And I am planning to play it myself as well. $60 almost feels like a steal. Like I literally burglarized Square Enix. I've paid $60 for a lot less, and I've paid $60 for a lot less, and I would pay far more for the same game. And together, let's get hyped for FF7 Remake 2. That's the script, I'm done. Final Fantasy VII, the 1997 PlayStation classic, is one of the most beloved video games of all time. The fanbase surrounding it is massive, and the praise is endless. However, this game aged like a F. There are a few people who may find reasons to dislike this game, but it's worth being passionate about. Blah 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 blah. 22 minutes. Jeez, 22 minutes for this script?